it is my pleasure at this moment. It's my pleasure to be recorded in progress. It is my pleasure to introduce someone who really doesn't need much introduction. She is the face of Ukraine here in the United States. And so it's important to hear from her. I thought it was, and we've made a special effort to make certain that we give her the time. She has limited time. She will not be able to take questions, but I am introducing Ambassador Markarova. Please give us our best, your best.
Thank you. Дуже дякую. Hello to everyone. And it's actually the pleasure and honor is all mine. And I'm so happy to be here with you. I always thought speaking before lunch is a challenge. And I always said, you know, I don't want to stand between lunch and people. But after lunch, apparently it's a challenge too, right? But dear Pane Vlodko, really, my dear friend, if I can call you informally, thank you for everything you do. And thank you for this wonderful event that you do on the annual basis for many, many, many years. And that we all can come together. And at different years, we're discussing different aspects of US-Ukraine partnership and engagement. And what can we do to make both of our countries stronger, but also closer together. But some things remain the same. Whether we're meeting before the full-fledged war, before even 2014 when Russia attacked us the first time, whether we talk during the big war, it all is focused on how democracies, and that's what Ukraine is, and that's what US is, how democracies can be stronger together. And before I go into something that I wanted to share with you as my remarks on where we are today and what are the top priorities and what are the top I think, goals and tasks in front of us today in US-Ukraine relations. I just want to say, as you all know, that yesterday has been a horrible day in Kyiv. Not that it was a surprise because Russia kept hitting civilians and cities throughout Ukraine for all 1,211 days, but the hit in Kyiv, which already claimed lives of more than 25, I think it's 27, unfortunately, already people, and wounded almost 140, is been one of the most difficult ones. So if I can ask you just without standing, but just keep 1 minute of silence for everyone we have lost in this war and everyone that we're losing on the battlefield also, just to have a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. These attacks, like this attack, like attack on Kremenchuk in Poltava Oblast, Odessa, Chernihiv, Zhytomyr, everything that we have seen during the last week and everything that we see, unfortunately, again, for more than 3 years now, everywhere in Ukraine, is pure terrorism. And we have to be very open and public about it. Nobody wants peace more than Ukraine, and we will keep pushing for peace, and we will support peace, and we have been supporting peace. But we also have to be very, very public about the fact that what Russia does is pure war crimes and terrorism, and they do it on a daily basis while they are lying to themselves, and to our partners that they want peace. And it's very clear to always remind people of what is going on the ground, who started this war, that it's Russia and Russia only that is an aggressor here, and that it's Ukraine that only defends itself. Whether we are talking about defending our cities, our loved ones, or whether we talk about defensive operations like Ukraine conducted in Kursk Oblast, or like the Spiderweb operation, in which no one was injured except for almost 40 aircrafts, which have been used to bomb peaceful Ukrainians in their sleep. All of those are defensive operations, and we have to be very clear. And Russia is the only aggressor there. Now, during the past 1,211 days. Ukraine have been committed to peace. And I think we also have to remind that President Zelensky not only responded to some peace initiatives, but he also has started one of the peace initiatives himself as early as in 2022, when he started talking about peace formula, and when we started working together on different aspects based on UN Charter of what will it take to bring peace and to get everyone who believe in the same values together around the idea of sovereignty, around the idea of territorial integrity, around the idea of civilian protection, around the idea of nuclear safety, of food security, or everything that Russia used to weaponize it. And of course, after President Trump became the president, and he has been very public and very straightforward about wanting to end this war, Ukraine has supported that initiative right away. So whether it was a full ceasefire proposal, which Ukraine immediately said yes, and not only said yes, but did everything that we had to do in order to be able to implement the full unconditional ceasefire, which we still believe is a great idea and which we still support. Similar with partial ceasefires, which Russia said maybe that will be more doable to us. We said, of course, and we have discussed and provided different types of suggestions of how this ceasefires, whether maritime or others, could look like. And when we heard from the so-called Russian president that he would like the direct negotiations and he wanted to see President Zelensky, he was there in Turkey right away in 2 days and was ready to negotiate. Well, unfortunately, the Russian counterpart was nowhere to be found. Instead, what we see on the battlefield and what we see, especially in attacks against civilians, speaks something else. While they say they want to negotiate, they continue to wage war, and that's what they show that they want. They don't want peace. We still want peace, and we will work tirelessly with all of our partners, with the United States, with Europe, with all other friends and allies, to get to peace faster. Now, what we have been able to achieve during this time and where we are in our US-Ukraine relations. I mean, you have seen numerous meetings that our teams had, whether here in Washington or during the travels to Kiev. You have seen already several meetings between our presidents, and whether in bilateral format or multilateral format. I want to spend a special attention point in the investment fund creation, because I think that idea was a bit mislabeled at the beginning, but it is a very good comprehensive investment vehicle, an investment fund that US and Ukraine put together in order to pool resources, in order to be able to actually not only work now, already prepare for the future reconstruction, but even think and work on investments now. And DFC, I mean, Treasury and DFC on US side, and Ministry of Economy and the agency that is responsible on our side are really working 24/7. We just started this day today with DFC, discussing it with American business on quickly setting up the fund. And as you have heard publicly from both sides, the potential military support or any other new support will be counted as US contribution into the fund. And Ukraine will be contributing also into the fund. And it's very important because, we have heard from the very beginning, Secretary Rubio, who said that all foreign policy decisions of this administration are going to be guided by 3 questions or answer to the 3 questions. Whatever US is going to do, will it make Ukraine safer? Will it make Ukraine stronger? And will it make US safer? Will it make US more safe, stronger, and more prosperous? And I think cooperation with Ukraine answers all of these 3. Ukraine is such an important element of not only regional, but global security. Without Ukraine winning this war and getting to peace, there is no robust answer to the question, is it okay to attack a peaceful country and redrawing borders by force in 21st century? And, this is very important that the conclusion of this war is just and lasting, so that we can actually have those rules, international rules, which we all think, we build our cooperation on, that they still are valid, and that the aggressors cannot go unpunished. So it's very important from the security standpoint. Now, from the economic standpoint, the Ukrainian win is very important too. Ukraine still, during the war, feeds more than 400 million people globally, even during the war. Ukraine in energy, digital innovations is one of the regional leaders, if not global leaders. And Ukraine is an answer to so many global challenges. Now, we can just, sometimes people say, what if Ukraine falls and Russia wins? And we don't have to look for an answer. We have seen that answer in the past when Ukraine was occupied by the Soviet Union. And then if you look at all the Soviet Union successes in their attacks against democratic countries, who was it in Gulag? Ukrainian engineers who were the authors of the Soviet space program. Soviet Union weaponized the food. And that's why I don't like the name Global South, but so many countries that depend on food from Ukraine, when it was controlled and occupied by Soviet Russia and distributed by them, how much political influence did they gain when it was their decision that was standing between hunger and lack of hunger? And we can go on and on and on. So the world cannot afford to have Ukraine occupied by Russia again, because we have seen what it leads to when it was occupied by the Soviet Union or Russian Empire. So there is no need to embolden other dictators, and that's what unfortunately Kremlin regime is, by providing them with additional resources and brains that we have in Ukraine. So look, what can we do today? You all have seen an amazing, the recipe for success is still the same as we discussed here a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and even before Russia attacked us in the first place. First, more support to Ukraine. We desperately need all of our partners to come together and work with us on defense production and provide us with all the defensive capabilities that we can. Now, Ukraine is not just asking for help there. Ukraine is also a good partner to have there, because the capabilities that we have in naval drones, in aerial drones, despite the web operation that we have conducted only with our capabilities, this is something that we are willing to share with all of our friends and partners. And I think cooperating in defense and defensive capabilities production is where Ukraine can benefit from the support. We need that support in order to protect our children, our loved ones, our homes, the peaceful Ukraine, but also that's where we can actually reinforce and make others stronger. Ukrainian armed forces, we have one of the largest battle-tested army, the army that holds Russia, regardless of how difficult it is. And you know that on the battlefield, of course, it will take more for us to be able to liberate more territories. But the fact that, and you can look at the map and you can compare Ukraine to the size of Russia, and you know the difference in capabilities and in number of people, and the fact that Russia was not able to advance from where they are, and our forces are holding a very difficult, very long line everywhere in the east, south, and partially in the north of Ukraine, is a testament to the armed forces that we have. Also, from the standpoint of the Black Sea and the security of navigation. After Russia attacked us in 2022, Ukraine has not only liberated 50% of what they have occupied in 2022, but we have also liberated the Black Sea, if I may say so. Because with our naval drone capabilities, we damaged or destroyed almost half of the Russian Black Sea fleet. And you remember in 2022, one of the key topics of discussion here was how to force or convince Russia to allow Ukrainian exports to go and to have the grain corridor. And we all were glad when we had this grain agreement brokered by the United Nations, which of course Russia was also like stolen with all the inspections and trying not to allow our fleet to go out and trying to dictate what you can and cannot export and to who you cannot export. And after we were able to liberate the Black Sea, now it's us who again can export. So from all of the standpoints, we still have to work on this, and the support to Ukraine is number one priority. Number two priority is sanctions to Russia. The sanctions that have been implemented after 2014 and especially after 2022, some people say they don't work as fast as we want to. That's true. I mean, we need them to work faster, but they do work. Russian economy is not in a good shape. They're using their internal resources. They're increasing the payments to their soldiers because they have really big trouble in getting people to go and fight in the war that people do not understand and do not know why they're fighting for against a neighboring country in which the majority of Russians, frankly, did not even visit it or travel during the past 30 years since 33, since we regained independence, and they have no idea why they have to do what they have to do. But the Russian economy is going down. Yes, it's a big country. Yes, they have been helped by Iran and North Korea and by those countries like China who are still buying a lot of oil and gas. But if we can toughen the sanctions and especially implement sectoral sanctions against all Russian banks, because still only 118 Russian banks are under full blocking sanctions by the US, and unfortunately Russia has 320 plus something. If we can implement, the holistic and sectoral sanctions, especially on Russian banks and Russian oil and gas sector, we will see a difference in Russia's calculation, how long they can sustain that effort. And maybe then they will be serious about their peace negotiation. So I'm very glad and we are very grateful to all of our friends on a very strong bipartisan basis in the Senate and in the House for the Sanctions Act. As you know, there is 84 senators that co-sponsored that bill in the Senate. And I think when it is put on the vote, we will see even more senators supporting it. And also on the House side, we have heard big support. So we have to still keep advocating for more sanctions on Russia, not only as a punishment for what they have done already, but as a tool to convince them to negotiate in good faith and actually start wanting peace. And that's very important. So, these actions and working together can really bring us closer to peace. And again, let me close by saying, nobody wants peace more than Ukraine. For us, this 3-something years have been the most horrible years, even though we have seen unimaginable bravery and resilience. And Ukrainian people, I think, have shown to the world that, like American people, we are the nation of brave and free. And we are proud that we are defending our homes and we're doing it in such difficult circumstances. But that's not what we want to do. We want to raise children and grow food and feed the world with the food that we grow and focus on all the innovations that we can bring to the world, from digital government to different types of innovative solutions in energy, in critical earth minerals, in production and everything else. And in order to do that, we need peace. And in order to get to peace, we need to get the second willing participant, an aggressor in our case, to want that peace. Ukraine wants that peace. Let's join our resources together. Let's put our minds and energy together in order to do that last mile, hopefully, in order to convince Russia that they cannot win this one, and they have to negotiate, and they have to be negotiating in good faith, and then we can get to peace. So God bless this great country. Slava Ukraini. And I want to, last one, thank amazing Ukrainian-American community. We have so many in the room, our diaspora, but today, a day when we have adopted President Zelensky's idea, which he has put on the agenda, even when he ran for presidency, the law on multiple citizenship that will allow Ukrainians in the United States to also have Ukrainian citizenship while holding the American citizenship. And, you know, we in diaspora, we have this wonderful pins, which has both flags and says, yes, I'm both of them. Well, now you can legally be both of them. So thank you again for all your work, and please do more. We are not here, we need to be. So we still have to stay the course, as our men and women on the battlefield says, in order to get to a better place and in order to build a better place for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you, and God bless you.
As they say, next year in Ukraine House, we're going to have this. Ambassador Markarova, thank you very much. It really is. It's each time you've given us a roadmap on what to do for the next year. I will very quickly, because we also have a guest, an important guest with us. But he's agreed to do questions and answers. So I'm going to invite my friend Mykola Hryckowian to preside over that question and answer. I'd like to introduce my very good friend, someone who has an enormous amount of experience both in the NGO and the government areas, and has, in fact, very recently come back from Ukraine on an important fact-finding trip alongside Senator Blumenthal and Senator Graham. And I think we'd want to hear from Kyle what might be happening in the next couple of months on the scene, and why Ukraine still does matter. Okay, Mick.
Does everybody hear me? Could you just, yeah.
Sorry, I just so bright.
Good afternoon. Does everybody, I think the sound is good? Yes? Okay, I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce Kyle Parker, a good friend of mine. He's been, I've known Kyle for probably about 20 years.
At least that, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
In 2018, Kyle was appointed as the U.S. Helsinki Commission Senior Senate Representative. He was Chief of Staff. And earlier in his career, he worked for a ranking member on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House, Eliot Engel, as a senior advisor overseeing U.S. foreign policy. And also, Kyle served as a policy advisor for Eurasia to the U.S. Helsinki Commission under the chairmanship of Sam Brownback. Also, earlier, when I got to know Kyle, he did work for 8 years at the American Foreign Policy Council, who's been a longtime sponsor for our various events and conferences. So I'd like to introduce Kyle Parker. Kyle probably is one of the top experts on the Hill regarding Ukraine, human rights, security matters in Europe. So Kyle, floor is yours.
Hey, thanks, Mick, Uncle Walter. Thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to be here with everybody. But you know, people who've been at this much longer than I have. I'd like to. Is the microphone? Let's see.
It's close. It's close.
I think it might be off. Is it off? Oh, we got it. Is that good?
Yeah.
All right. I'll try to speak a little louder. Does that work?
Yeah.
Roger that. Yeah. So thanks a lot for inviting me to be here today. I am just trying to set a timer because I want to make sure that we have enough time for the best part, question and answers. Why a free, stable, and prosperous Ukraine at peace with its neighbors matters. You know, I'd like to think that the answer to that is probably obvious for most of us in this room. Nonetheless, I will recap and give a few points. And I've been asked to do so from the U.S. government perspective. I just want to make clear, I work for the legislative branch. Chairman Roger Wicker, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, chairman of the U.S. Helsinki Commission, and probably I'd like to think that there is no greater friend in Congress of Ukraine and Ukraine's efforts than Roger Wicker. But I also want to make clear that I don't speak for him, and these remarks are my own perspective. So as Walter said, I just came back from my 8th trip to Ukraine since the full-scale invasion. This trip was mostly in Kiev. I've spent many of my earlier trips were in more forward areas. So I've tried to I've basically seen most of the line from the north to the south, as well as visited Ukrainian cities in the east and the west. Since the full-scale invasion, the Helsinki Commission, which is long focused. In fact, Orest Zaryckyj, a living proof of this as to how long we've focused on Ukraine. But since the full-scale invasion, we decided to exclusively focus on Ukraine. And insofar as we look at other questions in the region, we look at them through a lens of how this contributes to Ukraine's victory. Because really, the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe is literally in our middle name, and there's not a whole lot of it with a massive war in Europe. So why does it matter? Well, it matters, let me speak a few points to the why, a few points to the how, and conclude with a little bit of hope. Does that work? So on the why, the outcome, something like a Ukrainian victory, right, is really the only way you get to a Ukraine that's free, prosperous, and at peace with its neighbors. And this is first and foremost our best hope of shoring up the post-war U.S.-led international order, which has largely kept the peace in Europe, enabled trade, and promoted not just prosperity in Europe, but prosperity in the United States, right? Transatlantic prosperity. So point one. Point two, helping a friendly state fend off an unprovoked genocidal attack is a moral imperative. And we're a moral people, right? This is and I'd like to think this isn't really this isn't a value statement. This is rooted in realism. This is who we are as a people. It's who we've been over the long haul. And so, that's what we need to do. And I think that's what we will do. And you look at polling and things continue to show that there's robust support across this country to supporting Ukraine in what is probably the most textbook example of a just war. Third point, should Ukraine emerge from this war mostly intact, its battle-hardened armed forces, its innovative and reinvigorated and growing defense industrial base will be the best keeper of security in Europe, right? And frankly, will do more to keep the peace in Europe than NATO or the combined nuclear arsenals of the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. So from the U.S. perspective, we can't afford not to be allied with such a credible deterrent force in a part of the world that accounts for most of our trade, imports and exports, and a part of the world that we are still treaty bound to defend. On the how do we do this in this particular moment? As long as Ukrainians are willing to resist, Western democracies should support their fight. The United States has done more than any other state to support Ukraine. And I'm not speaking just since the full-scale invasion. With all due respect, many European states, especially you look at it on a per capita basis, have done an incredible amount. But the U.S. over the decades has bolstered Europe's defensive capabilities vis-a-vis the Russian threat. From logistics to lift to all of these things, it can't be done without the infrastructure and the know-how the United States has enabled in Europe. There are many things the United States can still do and still deliver to Ukraine and to Europe that are harder to quantify than money and weapons. but still real and needed. No other state in the world has the ability to confer or deny political legitimacy on another state, another leader, or any settlement. Vladimir Putin cares more about relevance than he does about being liked. The United States should act accordingly and consign him to maximum irrelevance, and should never confer legal recognition on any Russian territorial gains in Ukraine. The United States should also prioritize Ukraine's use of the Dnieper River, access to the Black Sea, and ultimate control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. That's a big one. With the nuclear, with those 6 reactors in Ukraine's control or pumping power to Ukraine, Ukraine immediately becomes a net energy exporter to Europe. So what can the Europeans do? Europeans should provide Ukraine's urgent and unmet monetary needs, right? They don't have to provide all of Ukraine's monetary needs, but they need to fill the shortfalls. They have the money, and they can decide for themselves how much they spend from their own coffers and how much they confiscate from the Russian state assets held in their banks. And given the West's depleted stockpile of weapons, the lead time and cost of new production, as well as a desire to avoid stoking inflation in their own economies, European states should arm Ukraine using mechanisms such as the Danish model. And this is a model where European states use their wealth to purchase weapons for Ukraine from Ukrainian producers inside Ukraine. Ukraine still has the ability to produce more. It just doesn't have the money to produce more. And at this moment, I think roughly 40% of the kit Ukraine is using on the battlefield is being produced inside Ukraine. Finally, to end on a note of hope. I was just in Kiev recently. I met with as many Ukrainians as I could possibly squeeze into my brief visit. Slept very little to account for having to. I was with the embassy this time, so I couldn't sleep through air raids. I had to follow the rules and stay within the green zone and hallway or bunker as instructed. But no one I spoke to expects an end to this war anytime soon. No one holds out any hope for this peace process, for any ceasefire. At the same time, no one I spoke to is ready to concede anything to an aggressor hell-bent on erasing them, erasing their culture, their existence, and their individual physical persons, right? This is all very personal for Ukrainians. They're exhausted, but they fight on because they have no other choice if they want to survive. I really wish more Americans could see this and go to Ukraine and just see what Ukraine looks like at war. The roads are great. The gas stations and restrooms are cleaner than they are here. You can find my little favorite Starbucks double shot espresso cans, which have all been replaced in this country by these oversized energy drinks that occasionally taste a little bit like coffee. Your phone works well. The Wi-Fi is often faster, and they hold book fairs complete with music and food carts under not simply the threat, but the reality of constant Russian attack that can come in the form of Garand 2 drones, can come in the form of ballistic missiles, which you have about 3 minutes to shelter from. They do all this, right? Life goes on. These are not the marks of a country that's on the verge of defeat. These are the marks of a society that wants to live, that goes on living, and that teaches us how to live more fully. Ukrainians have learned in this war not to fear the Russians. And it's time that we learn to shed our fear of the Russians too. And with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take the privilege of the moderator to ask the first question. Okay. The OSCE is responsible for monitoring human rights throughout Europe and through the various countries. And we've been barraged by various accusations here in this country that Ukraine is persecuting Christians. And I know most of this audience understands that that's not true, but I would like to get our expert from the Helsinki Commission to address that. There is a very strong lobbying campaign on Capitol Hill that is accusing Ukraine of persecuting Christians. And recently, there was a Newsmax article where they were extensively quoting Vladimir Putin, where he was saying that he is the protector of Christianity, and that the United States and Russia have a common interest in protecting traditional Christianity. So, Kyle, what did you see in Ukraine at all your trips?
Well, thanks, Mick. I mean, I think unfortunately, this campaign that you mentioned has affected public opinion and needs to be taken seriously. That said, it's nonsense, right? It's nonsense that Russia persecutes, that Ukraine persecutes Christians. Russia ruthlessly destroys churches, persecutes believers, Christian, Jewish, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others, evangelicals. Ukraine is an evangelical stronghold. Many Americans don't realize that. On the occupied territories, we're talking torture, disappearance, murder, just the worst sort of things. Destruction of sites that with immense historic and religious significance. So it's really hard to take this seriously. I did have a meeting, for what it's worth, with the official government entity that looks at this question and spoke to this. And Ukraine is a democracy, right? And even during the war, these the institutions of the state function. Regarding the Russian Orthodox Church, there are court cases that are working their way through the Ukrainian system on this. I even was able to, because of the commission's long history on this, raise the question of conscientious objectors in Ukraine, because we hear from groups such as the Jehovah's Witnesses that Ukraine's legal framework is insufficient for this. Ukraine recognizes this. At the moment, there are about, I think, 4 conscientious objectors who are in jail for refusing military service. But even for those 4, they understand that's a problem, and they're working on remedying the law. And of course, in this country, you look at groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses who have affected our own legal traditions on alternative service and conscientious objection. So, it's not a serious argument, and I think it should be dismissed as such.
Thank you, Kyle. And we are running overtime, but I'll permit 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Ambassador Gilmore.
I'm going to ask you a question about Senate politics. You and I have had a conversation. Senator Wicker has been a dramatically good leader in the U.S. Senate on this issue and all other national security issues. And lately, we've seen Senator Graham, to my somewhat amazement, lead the way on the new sanctions issues, which has an underlying stronger policy if it becomes actual law. My question to you is, does Senator Wicker and others have a core of Senate leadership that will influence policy on this? They seem to be a bit passive to me. And I'm curious to know as to whether you think that we can rely on any Senate leadership to coalesce around this issue of the Ukraine war.
Thank you, Ambassador. Senate politics are a little bit above my pay grade, but I just will say that Senator Wicker is a co-sponsor of that legislation, as are at this point the vast majority of the Senate, and I haven't checked the House numbers. But I think they're similarly robust. There's one thing I will say, and I don't mean in any way to dismiss the importance of sanctions here. But the president doesn't need any new authority to impose sanctions, right? The powers of IEEPA, which is the law that we use to impose sanctions during peacetime, are sweeping and fearsome, right? And the president can tap them by declaring national emergencies, which we've seen repeatedly in the recent roughly 6 months. And it's my understanding that the sanctions bill is permissive. So it's something that says, you know, you can do this. So I hope it passes. I think any step forward is a good signal and a warning to others. But I also think, you know, it's only a very small part of what we need to be doing and the solution. And from where I sit, you know, I think it would be just as powerful to deny Vladimir Putin the legitimacy he craves. Our attention is a very big deliverable. Our engagement, our phone calls are very big deliverables for him. And, you know, Russia has shown that it's willing to fight on despite the sanctions. And for these sanctions to be serious, they need to be enforced. We've seen lackluster sort of enthusiasm on the European side as well in certain areas like price cap. I know the U.S. is also in that position at the moment, but you know, that's what I would say on the sanctions. I'm more concerned at the moment about the weapons, particularly air defense interceptors, which Ukraine is dangerously low on, and there's not an easy answer to that, especially with war in the Middle East, where interceptors have been repurposed, understandably, to protect American troops in the region. So I think you look at that. I want to see better ways to enable Ukraine's long-range strikes, deep strike in Russia, because ultimately it's a losing. I mean, given the magazine depth that the Russians have of rocketry and how they send an order of magnitude greater numbers of drones into Ukraine on a daily basis than Ukraine sends into Russia, that's my bigger worry. You don't win the war with those strikes. You don't really change the front line. Russia's goal, I think, here is to break the will of the populace to resist. And you've seen that through targeting civilian objects, energy infrastructure.
Next question. Anyone? Okay, if not, I'll ask I'll ask a question. Okay, and this is on the heels of what Phil Peterson brought up regarding a concept of victory. And one of the ideas that he brought up was the dissolution of the Russian Federation. We have posters here in the hall. These are various political prisoners. There's 200 of them, of the various indigenous people that are found in the Russian Federation. I know the United States was reluctant in 1991 to see the dissolution of the USSR. Can you give us, and this would be your personal opinion as an expert, and you know the feeling out there in Congress and in the expert community, is the United States willing to accept the dissolution of the Russian Federation?
Thanks, Mick. It's interesting. Well, no, it's a good question, and I'm happy to tackle it as best I can. So I had a nice round of drinks on a Friday night with some leading experts in Kiev from Kiev Mohila and others who are working on this question. And when I asked them, you know, what is your theory of victory? Immediately they said decolonization in Russia. And I think, yes, you know, from an ultimate standpoint, you know, that is the answer. As long as Russia harbors imperial ambitions, you know, they're going to be a problem, right? But they're a problem, you know. I also think that it really doesn't matter whether the United States is ready to accept this. These are questions that have their own energy. There's tremendous tension inside the Russian system. I think it's more a question of the United States preparing for this and not being caught flat-footed should it happen. You know, preparing for instability in Russia and meanwhile, you know, looking for ways to contain it, keep it within its internationally recognized borders, until it has that internal reckoning. And as we've seen, it's been very hard to affect that from abroad. That's, you know, we've worked at this. I think it's one of the great disappointments of the post 91 order is, you know, we had this little window of kind of irrational optimism that lasted from, you know, maybe you could argue it was just 1992. The door slammed shut in 1993, and it's been a smooth continuum. It's been a smooth downhill continuum. So, you know, I don't know. Will it happen? I think we need to. It's certainly something we need to be ready for and thinking about. I don't think there's enough thinking about that. And I do see a question in the back, Nick, if we're able to.
Yeah, one
entertain
last
more.
question, Margarita.
It's not about accepting the decolonization of Russia. It's about, are we prepared to have more friends among the Russian republics than we have now in the face of Putin? Are we prepared to be able to recognize those who want to be independent? Because Russia is one of the last two remaining empires. It's inevitably, the decolonization of Russia is inevitable sooner or later. If we keep it within this realm of internationally recognized borders, we are bound to fail again, because that takes a lot of preparation to be able to meet the new states, to assess them, to make sure the denuclearization is happening, to make sure that they are turning to the West and to our friends in Asia instead of being submitted to Russia.
Yeah, point taking. I understand your question to mean that Russia's internationally recognized borders might not be enough. I guess I would just say in terms of choreography here and sequencing, you know, at the moment, I think the real urgent question is protecting Ukraine from losing, you know, from losing more territory and being able to hold the line and helping them to, you know, again, harden their defense against these long range strikes there, because the Ukrainian soldiers are more or less holding the line, right? It's the long range strikes that are the harder question. But, you know, and also I would argue that, you know, a Ukrainian victory or something like that in this situation is probably our best hope at another shot at trying to do 1991 right. Walter, did you?
I wanted to say, I think a lot of folks have been trying to get to that. The Helsinki Commission at some point had a real role, has had a role since 75. Oh, yeah. The Helsinki Commission has had a real role since 75. In fact, it created those wonderful baskets of human rights and so on and so forth. And those national committees, you remember the Georgians, the Armenians, the Ukrainians ended up with Helsinki groups. Is it possible, man? I mean, under a favorable circumstance, whether the Senate and House Helsinki folks might not consider offering something like that to some of the indigenous peoples of the Russian Federation, or speaking out on their behalf.
Thank you, Walter. We have a long history. In fact, you know, the Helsinki Commission was created in 1976.
Yes.
Not 1776. 1976. God willing, we turn 50 next year if we make it. So no, I mean, the Helsinki Commission's creation was a bipartisan reflection of the American people's kind of concern and interest in these groups. In fact, you know, nobody expected the Helsinki Final Act to lead to what it led to. In fact, you know, it cost President Ford and the diaspora groups, you know, this op-eds and things, Jerry Don't Go, thought it was going to be a sellout. And seemingly overnight, these Helsinki monitors and watch groups appeared across the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, and the Helsinki Commission was stood up to hear them and to work with them, and that's what we've done. There is no other analog in the OSCE space for a governmental Helsinki Commission, and I would say that, you know, at this particular moment, we are among the last people standing, as the sector has been gutted in recent months, a sector that really looks at the normative dimension, the importance of values in our national security.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really sure. Yeah. I actually broke my own regime on doing that and so like that, but I think that's where the questions were going. I will now not give any sort of breaks. We are moving on to our very next session. Kyle, I want to thank you very much for having given us the time for the and the words.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
And now I would ask Ambassador Popadiuk, I've seen you I would ask Ambassador Popadiuk, I would ask Margarita Assenova, I've seen her. I see Ariel Cohen, Dr. Cohen is here, Max Pysiur, and I think we have somebody on the line. Have you been able? Yeah. Yeah. We may.
The most important aspect of an economy. It not only drives the economy, but also has an impact on the morale of people, as seen by the provision of lighting, provision of heating. So it's very well understood that the Russians would want to target the energy sector of Ukraine, and has been bombarding it mercilessly over the past few years. Oddly enough, at the very beginning of the war, the energy sector was spared by the Russians, with the assumption that the Russian army would walk in very easily and take over the country. And therefore, the Russians wanted to make sure that the energy grid stayed in place and that they could make use of it. Of course, Ukraine's resilience as a population has withstood the Russian onslaught, and the Ukrainians have been very well in adapting, have done very well in adapting to the shortages in electricity. They've been able to adapt in terms of the knockout of stations, substations, transmission lines. They've been very innovative in how they've tackled these issues. In addition, the Ukraine has been able to receive electricity from Europe. So by various measures, stopgap measures, their own as well as the assistance of Europe, Ukraine has been able to weather the attacks on the energy grid. Unfortunately, still, despite all this ingenuity and assistance, Ukraine's energy grid is probably operating about at a third of the level that it did before the war. But to examine this very important issue, we have three experts with us, and I'm pleased to see that they are well prepared to tackle the questions that you will have, as well as presenting some very cogent arguments. Joining us today is Margarita Assenova, who's a senior fellow at the Jamestown Foundation. She is an expert on energy security issues and has written extensively and dealt extensively on this issue in Europe and Eurasia. So welcome, Margarita. Also joining us is Ariel Cohen. Ariel is a founding partner of International Marketing Analysis, a consulting firm. He is well recognized as an international expert on international energy issues, political risk, and other security issues. And joining us also is Max Pysiur of the new energy.
It's the Energy Policy Research Foundation.
Project. I'm sorry, Energy Research Policy Foundation. And he'll be giving us his insights. We were supposed to have Jacques Mendoza Wilson from SCMD-Tech, but unfortunately we can't make the link to Ukraine at this time. If he's able to break in, we'll be happy to have him have the floor. So with that, we'll go in alphabetical order. And Margarita, let me turn the mic over to you and for your comments, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Popadiuk. You described the situation in general terms. Yes, the energy sector of Ukraine has been heavily bombarded. And even further, it's been attacked with cluster munition missiles, which is designed to completely destroy whatever these missiles hit. It has started from the first weeks after the Russians realized that they're not going to easily take control of Ukraine, but has increased substantially last year. From March to May, a series of attacks, and then further in August was one of the biggest attacks that took place. But they have not stopped. They even talk about peace and ceasefire, have not led to any suspension of those attacks. Just 10 days ago, on June 6th, there was a massive missile and drone attack resulted in power outages in Lviv, in Ternopil, Chernihiv, and the city of Kyiv. As a result, commercial electricity imports to Ukraine increased by 54% that week. So right now they're importing about 60 gigawatts of gigawatt hours of electricity from abroad, mostly from Eastern European countries such as Poland and Hungary and Romania, Moldova. But Ukraine is also exporting about 30 gigawatts per hour electricity. So the net import is about 30. The attacks on energy infrastructure have, on August 26th of last year, Russia fired more than 200 missiles and drones, and around 8 million households lost power. 8 million households. This is a very significant number. Ever since then, and then before that, even the rollouts, the stop and start of electricity supply has been a regular feature of the life of most Ukrainians. Prior to Russia's full-scale invasion, nuclear power generated half of the country's electricity, and 1/4 of this half was generated in Zaporizhia, the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, which has been under Russian control since 22. For 3 years, the Russians have been trying to connect this power plant to the Russian grid, and the geniuses haven't been able to do that. Right now, there are satellite pictures showing that they're pulling a line, and they still can't pull it to connect with the Russian grid. The other part of the Russian energy production has been from coal and from gas. The power generated plants have been systematically destroyed as well. At least 18 and probably more of them have been destroyed. So with Zaporizhia, Ukraine lost 3 gigawatts of capacity generated. And then they lost another 9 gigawatts of generation capacity through thermal and hydro assets. So the situation is not pretty. It's extremely difficult. It's particularly difficult for the people who are doing the repairs. The grid has been affected heavily as well, the high power grid, and that is actually affecting the other nuclear power stations in the country, because if the grid is interrupted, they will be denied electricity supply, and that's a pretty dangerous situation. But due to the reduced demand, because of the economic situation in Ukraine, and also due to immigration of about 6.5 million Ukrainians, the demand for electricity has been reduced too. So we have two situations that working at the same time: destroyed capacities and reduced demand. To some extent, they are balancing each other, but if it was not for the selfless efforts of the workers in the electricity sector and the energy sector, we would have been seeing a lot of blackout cities and blackout days, and completely impossible to have electricity in the country. The repairs and reconstruction have been going on since the beginning of the war. Ukraine relied on outdated production and transmission facilities. So these facilities now are being destroyed. And what is happening? on their place. Ukrainian energy companies have been forced to replace much of this aging infrastructure with newer, more resilient capacity. In addition, approximately 1 gigawatt of gas-fired and solar power capacity has been installed, including off-grid facilities dedicated to single users. At the time of war, Ukraine is building solar capacities, which is quite amazing. And the decentralization of the energy system has started to take place, not because of sustainability concerns, as it is the driver in most countries, but because of security. If you have smaller generation capacities, they are less likely to be hit by Russia. The bigger ones are easier targets. So this kind of decentralization and this kind of putting new stations that are smaller in capacity is taking place, and it's actually saving the country for now. But there also a lot of money coming for the reconstruction of electricity capacities. For example, last year, within the last 1 year, Ukrainian banks have received 4,500 applications for loans to restore energy infrastructure that will worth 86 billion Ukrainian hryvnias, and about 18 billion Ukrainian hryvnias have been already distributed. France is engaged, providing additional 200 million to support Ukraine's reconstruction projects and integration with the European market. A European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has also provided grants to Ukrainian energy sector, and a lot of donations also coming to Ukraine, especially since the United States kind of withdrew from assistance to Ukraine. Funds that are coming to the reserve fund, I believe it's about $35 billion now, that came pretty much in recent weeks to Ukraine. A lot of this money is going to be used also for reconstructing energy capacities. It is a miracle that the system has not broken down. It is a miracle that it's still functioning regardless of this heavy bombardment. The fact that Ukraine managed to connect with the European grid in the first weeks of the invasion was a plus. The fact that Ukraine managed to stay self-sustained on gas and gas demand and gas production is also of help. Right now, Ukraine is buying gas from neighboring countries, importing from Poland and from Hungary, and from some is coming from Moldova. It's buying gas because it's the time to fill up the facilities, the storage facilities. Summer is the time to get a lot of gas into storage facilities. And if that happens, and we don't have, again, a very cold winter, the situation may become at least the same and not worsen. But since Ukraine is showing capacity to destroy Russian energy objects like refineries and military targets in Russia, we will see how this is going to affect potentially future attacks by Russia on the Ukrainian energy sector. Thank you.
Margarita. Thank you very much, Margarita. That was an excellent overview of the situation on the ground regarding the energy sector in Ukraine. I'm sure it lays a great foundation for some very thoughtful questioning that our audience can think over in the meantime before we get to the question stage. At this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to Ariel.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I want to thank the organizers who keep inviting me now for 20-some years. And Walter, you're doing God's work. Thank you so much. Also, Andrei and Mykola. It is not a happy story right now, what the Russian military is doing to the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. As Margarita mentioned, they stepped up the missile attacks in 2024. They hit thermal and hydropower plants, removing 9 gigabytes of 9 gigawatts, sorry, 9 gigawatts from Ukrainian power generation capacity, and the strikes are continuing. The cost of replacing 9 gigawatts is 7 billion if you go with natural gas, and as high as 14, 15 billion if you're going with wind and solar. If the EU provides that money, my recommendation would be do a combination of gas and renewables, but Ukraine needs to do what it needs to do to bring back the energy supply sooner rather than later to supply the population and renew industrial production. The total damage to the Ukrainian energy sector, ladies and gentlemen, is $68 billion. And I know where the money to rebuild it is. That's a frozen Russian money in the West. But it takes leadership. It takes guts to get this compensation. Are we going to do it? Are the Europeans going to do it? Is Mr. Trump going to do it? Open question. As Nikolai Hohl wrote, where is it going? We don't have an answer. The gas imports so far are balancing the energy balance. It depends how empty the gas storage reserves are and what kind of winter we're going to have. I'll talk a little bit later about it, but in the meantime, Ukraine is not sitting on its hands. It's hitting back. It's hitting back the Russian refinery capacity, some pipeline hubs. And the question I asked myself when I was researching that is, what are the results of that? And the results are that the Russian oil exports fell 8%. You can say it's not only because of the Ukrainian attacks, it's also because of enforcement of the sanctions. It's also because people don't want to get entangled with Russian companies. It's also because there's still plenty of oil before Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz as they threaten. But if they do, they're going to be shooting themselves in both feet because A, they'll be losing the greatest customer, China, and B, they'll be losing the revenue. So not yet, not yet. And both LNG from Qatar, LNG from the United States, and other sources of gas are available for European and other markets. So Ukraine figured out that striking deep into Russian territory, disrupting the logistics is the way to go. I'm very sorry. That the Russians calling. So the strategic attacks are not yet the principal factor affecting Russian energy profits, but they remain a worthwhile endeavor, imposing tangible costs on the Kremlin's primary driver. Imposing losses that are estimated as $700 million with an M dollars a year. The less Russian oil appears in the global market, the more opportunities American oil sector and other exporters, Saudi Arabia, you name it, have to replace the Russian oil. And once it's replaced, it is more difficult to come back and recapture bring back your market share. The US, as we saw to our horror, tried to negotiate some kind of a natural resources and mineral deal that was quite a show to watch. In my 30 plus years in Washington, I did not see a US president behaving like that in the Oval. I don't know, my senior colleague, Ambassador Herbst, is here. Maybe he saw it in his experienced, maybe not in this country, but somewhere else, a deliberate attempt to humiliate an embattled ally. Having said that, that deal was signed, and we still don't understand what the implications are going to be. Because the way it's structured, there's no way to predict. Is anybody going to be making money? Where the money is going to be coming from, et cetera, et cetera. But my Ukrainian contacts are telling me that there was one aspect of this deal that was not thought through well, and that is expropriating assets from private companies and putting it in that pot of assets that Ukraine claims are state-owned assets. And if it's disputed in European and other jurisdictions in litigation arbitration, the administration in Kyiv may have an egg on its face, shall we say. European support is as good as it gets. Naftahaz is receiving 36.4 million euro loan from EBRD to modernize its drilling equipment. Critical step given Russia attack has cut production by 40%. In February, EU offered an energy security integration package with primary goal of interconnecting Ukraine grid with Europe by 2027. I already mentioned the question mark about the winter. The veteran gas expert, Sergei Mokohon, former CEO of Gas Transmission Systems, some says that Ukraine would need to import 6.3 BCM, that's billion cubic meters, of gas, whereas Naftahaz saying Ukraine will need to import 4.6 BCM. Russia still is exporting quite a lot of gas via Turkstream to their friend, Mr. Erdogan in Turkey, and then further to Europe. So to make a long story short, considering that the country is in a war with a superior adversary, the Ukrainian energy sector is doing okay. The challenges are going to be both how to continue in wartime and then the reconstruction in the peacetime. And my suggestion, based on many, many years following the Ukraine energy industry and especially oil and gas, do not hesitate to privatize. Do not hesitate to rely on the private sector in prospecting, exploration, and production. I think that's pretty much what I have to say. I'll be happy to answer questions. And again, many, many thanks for the work.
Ariel, thank you very much for those informational comments, particularly raising the cost to the public knowledge here, the cost that's been incurred for the Ukrainians in terms of rebuilding the energy sector, and also by pointing out some of the weak spots in the Russian energy chain that the West should exploit in order to put pressure on the Russians, which unfortunately we're not fully utilizing. So thank you very much. Max, we'll turn to you now. If you could give us your comments, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. My name is Max Pysiur. I'm a research director at the Energy Policy Research Foundation. We go by the acronym of EPRINC. My comments today are going to be extemporized. I have some items that are prepared, so I may stammer a little, so I'm asking for your indulgence on this particular point. Since our discussion is predicated on energy security, I thought it would be good to go through a taxonomy of energy security and see potentially how that might apply to Ukraine. And then also some other comments about the energy transition, whether it's appropriate for Ukraine, and then conclude with some other remarks. As far as energy security, and this arises out of the oil shortages in the 1970s, theoretical studies, academic studies, but it came down to three core concepts: availability and diversity of energy resources, affordability, and acceptability. And so as you apply those to the United States, one of the things that's a recurring theme in the United States is import dependence and vulnerability, and whether there'll be available resources. What's the cost of them? And as most politicians know, it's if the prices of gasoline are going up, perhaps Ambassador Gilmore knows this one. If the prices of gasoline going up, well, then you're potentially vulnerable in the next election. And then acceptability, efficiency, things of that nature. How much does it cost as a percentage of GDP? Looking at this typology and trying to apply it to Ukraine, it's something of a challenge because it's difficult to glean metrics. And then the other thing, war definitely changes things. As both Margarita and Ariel have discussed, there's a considerably large amount of generating capacity. It's been taken offline thanks to Russia's bombardment. Other metrics as far as affordability, they're hard to discern, but anecdotally, as some other people have relayed, also my wife has traveled to Ukraine. She didn't speak of disruptions. So despite all these things, energy is still available. Energy is still being generated. Sorry, I don't mean to get lost. So despite the adversity, Ukraine still is managing. Not as well as it could be, but it's still managing. Using this legacy energy framework, energy security framework that I just described, it's important to consider the current moment. We've had expansive notions. These notions have been expanded to encompass environmental redefinitions, both legitimate and excessive, national security criteria, economic interdependence, and long-term energy changes. One of the things that's impacting this is this whole notion of an energy transition. And we hear constantly about the energy transition, the need to transform our energy resources. All this arises from an accelerated discussion in the need to mitigate greenhouse gases because there's global warming. It's important to step back and say, this isn't just the only energy transition under consideration. It's important to understand energy transitions as far as a framework. So first, it's important to distinguish between technological energy transitions and induced energy transitions. Across the span of civilization, we've gone from the use of our muscles to the use of cattle, to the use of water, to the use of hydrocarbon fuels, and then finally to electricity. At each step, considerable advantages were created. So historically, we have that category of energy transitions. As far as the so-called energy transition that we're discussing now, and this is more globally, and we'll get back to Ukraine, is we've had other induced energy transitions. Most of these have arisen from the 1970 oil crises that we had brought on by the Arab oil embargo of 73. And I'm sorry, I hit something. And the 79 oil, Iranian Revolution. As a consequence, certain countries took very serious policies to induce transitions from oil to other means, to other sources of energy. Japan nuclearized its power generating sector. France did the same thing. Cold War Europe transformed from petroleum products to Soviet pipeline gas. Argentina attempted to transform a large portion of its automobile fleet to natural gas in the hopes of capturing rents by exporting its crude oil. In the case of Japan, this was a major success. In the case of France, it was a success. In the case of the 1980s with Europe, it was a success, but it became challenged in 2006 and 2009 when vulnerabilities were exposed to Russian gas. The current moment is focused on massive electrification through the use of intermittent resources. And I heard someone earlier, and I don't remember who was, Anders, I think, who referenced how it was a good thing for Ukraine to be adopting distributed resources, getting electricity from intermittent resources. I would challenge that, and I would look at the example of California, I would look at the example of Texas, and most recently, I would look at the example of what took place in the Iberian Peninsula, where you had the massive blackouts. It comes back to, sorry, a notion that there's an interdependence between energy security, as I described by the framework earlier, and economic security. And then without economic security, you don't have national security. In the context of Ukraine, national security now is paramount. So it's already undermined by Russia's attacks. If there is momentum to move into intermittent resources, which Anders referenced earlier, then this economic security and national security becomes undermined that much more. Trying to bring it back to the present and the comments that Ariel and Margarita made, despite the circumstances, Ukraine somehow manages. So that's the domestic energy situation. But until recently, it's also been an energy transit country, and it's also an energy storage country in the current moment. Those things that mostly through the energy storage, Ukraine guarantees Europe's energy security because it's the huge capacity that it has acts as a backup for Europe. While I agree with Ariel that still Russian natural gas is pipelined through Turk Stream into Europe, there's been a huge shift. One, the pipeline agreements, transit agreements with Ukraine and Russia, they have not been renewed. Consequently, no Russian natural gas is pipelined through Ukraine. And as a consequence, one of the things that's taken place is that US LNG has become the dominant natural gas, the dominant import of natural gas into Europe. Europe requires something close to 20 billion cubic feet per day of the LNG. The LNG component maybe makes up about 50 to 70% of that, and easily more than half of that comes from the United States in the current moment. But to promote energy security and to promote economic security and national security in Ukraine, I'd like to propose one thing, thank you. Rather than strengthen sanctions, let's consider something else. And that's revamping the whole Russian oil price cap.
Mhm.
Rather than try and remove Russian barrels from global markets, let them pass freely through the Balkans, through the Bosporus and through the Danish Straits and from Espoo. But let's make sure G7, or as Stephen Plank, I think it was, said the G6, let them enforce this particular mechanism that I'm proposing. Let the G6 or G7 countries collect a tariff on every barrel of oil that's moved through the Bosporus every barrel of oil is moved through the Danish Straits. And the majority of that should go to the national treasury. That would fund their war effort, that would fund their economy, and that would fund a reconstruction at the end. Anyway, I have more things to say, but I was asked to wrap.
Max, thank you very much with that concluding comment about a proposal that you put forward, which merits great examination. I'm particularly struck by your comments about nuclear possibilities in Ukraine, as well as the alternative energy sector, and your focus on LNG and gas in particular. That concludes our paneled presentations. We have time for a few questions before we go. I guess, Walter, we go to the grading system. As the moderator, I would like to take the privilege of asking the very first question to kind of pick up on a thread that was common to all of you, and that's the nuclear sector in Ukraine. And I think, Margarita, you had mentioned that 50% of Ukraine's energy sector is nuclear-based. And of course, in the nuclear area, the word Zaporizhzhia comes up, and you mentioned Zaporizhzhia. And I wonder if you could give us an update on the status of that, what kind of threat it could still be in terms of a possible explosion. As you recall, when the first attacks took place, there was great fear of an explosion, contamination, etc. But I'm assuming that our audience would love to hear an update on what the status of that is.
The Russians are still occupying Zaporizhzhia. It has become a storage place for ammunition, and this is a big danger if this ammunition explodes. I think that the reactors are secure for now, but they're using water from the river, from the Dnipro river there to cool the reactors, which apparently it's against procedures. I don't know what the procedures exactly are, but I read somewhere that that's illegal. They're trying to restart the reactors. Well, these reactors are pretty secure when they are in a situation they're used, and they are cooled right now, being cooled right now, and the process is kind of frozen. But if they're trying to restart them and they don't restart them properly under the supervision of the International Atomic Energy Agency, it could be a big devastation. So if they cannot pull a cable to connect the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to the Russian grid, you can imagine what the competency is of those people that are trying to do it. I don't think that they will be able to connect it. I don't think that they are going to be able to restart the power plant. It may kind of preserve the situation. Hopefully there won't be explosions, but it is pretty dangerous because they have put in the yard, in the open spaces there, so much ammunition that, and they're still exploiting the Ukrainian engineers and workers at this power plant. It's just forcing them to work, not providing any normal conditions. There have been so many signals how much these people suffer. And I think in the future, they should be really given the highest awards for what they're doing. It's absolutely heroic work. The only reason they're doing it is to protect the Ukrainian territory from another nuclear disaster.
Thank you. Ariel, Max, you have anything to add or comment? Okay, let me turn to the audience then. Anyone have any questions to pose to our panelists? John.
Ukrainian officials have said that Trump asked them not to target Russian energy infrastructure. Do we know if in fact that has happened?
I missed the question.
Well, if they know, they're not telling.
No.
What is happening? What is the question?
The question is that the report is that Trump asked the Ukrainians not to target Russian energy sector. And do we know that is a fact?
No, I don't think we know that is a fact. That he was calling for a ceasefire and stopping mutual destruction of energy infrastructure. I think that he called on Ukrainians to to stop attack Russia, but attacking Ukraine. So it was really useless. Anyone?
Any attacks by Ukraine in the last 2 weeks on energy in Russia?
I haven't heard, but I think that we witnessed the biggest attack on air bases by Ukraine. So I think that they are going to pay. There was something burning again. There was an energy object burning again just last week. Yeah, anybody has heard any attacks?
Yeah.
They are not going to stop. The drones are going to continue hitting.
We have a question over here. Yeah. I hear you. There you go. Whoa.
Been so conversational, competing with the air conditioning system, and we can't hear you.
Oh.
But I want to follow up on what Max said, because I want to make sure I understand it. Max, you made a proposal right at the end that there should be an alternative approach on Russian energy. And I think you said there should be a tariff on Russian oil coming out as an alternative approach. That, number one, a tariff is just paid by the receiver of the oil. That's no harm to Russia. And number two, what enforcement mechanism would there be for that anyway? It didn't. I may have misunderstood you because of the depth of the faintness of the conversation.
I didn't explain it fully, but yes, a tariff that Russia would pay on the barrels that it transits through the Bosporus, through the Danish Straits, and hopefully out of Espoo. Yeah, it's a controversial proposal. I'm not proposing it in the singular. It was there was also an op-ed by Glenn Hubbard, a former economic advisor to George W. Bush. I think he's dean of the Columbia Business School. He wrote a similar op-ed proposing a similar function. It would, yes, there would have to be enforcement, but it just basically arises out of the thinking that if you prohibit something, people are going to find alternatives to move it. You see that the sanctions that we've had in place since 2022, they're essentially cosmetic, and you've developed a whole alternative shadow fleet of tankers to move this oil. You've made a certain group of Russian oil traders in Dubai incredibly wealthy. So, and you may be only taking about 8% of total Russian crude oil and petroleum product exports off global markets. So, consider trying an alternative. And it's also, Ariel brought up the number 68 billion to, I think it was to, I don't know where the number came from, but to deal with the damage that's been done to Ukrainian infrastructure. And there's a swath of stuff that's been damaged. So it's the proposal serves numerous purposes. It's to penalize Russia, to compensate Ukraine, to fund its war effort, and to fund reconstruction afterwards.
Okay, we have time for one last question. Walter?
Yes.
Sure, again.
You're on.
We're on. I just simply, very quickly, because one of the questions was on one of the issues suggested was storage. Has anybody done any sort of planning on either the Ukrainian side or the Russian side in terms of the vast capabilities for storage on a lot of things, and especially on gas in Ukraine? We've talked about the transport side, but the storage side, I've heard numbers that are pretty astounding. I mean, and so I'd like to just that as the last question. So that.
Margarita and I will try and work a tandem here. Ukraine has about 1 trillion cubic feet of storage. I can't convert that quickly into
36
billion cubic
billion
meters, but
cubic meters.
it's
26 billion?
36.
it's just for the sake of comparison, the United States has a 4 trillion cubic feet of storage. So it's 1/4 of the storage. Ukraine has 1/4 of the storage. That proved to be very useful in 2023 when there was a huge buffer of natural gas stored in Ukraine on behalf of Europe. However, attacks and pricing differentials became very unfavorable in 2024 and also in this year. This winter was particularly severe in Europe and in Ukraine. So you've seen a huge depletion in supplies going into the summer of 2025. But the capacity is there. It was utilized greatly in 2023, not so much in last year. Please.
Yeah, Ukraine has the largest natural gas storage facilities in Europe, 36 billion cubic meters. There is an effort now done by Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, and Ukraine. They signed an agreement to use that storage, and they offer a price as a result that is 20% lower. So what happens is they're using the Trans-Balkan pipeline, which is redundant now. I mean, all pipelines that Russia was using in Ukraine are redundant now, but this one was redundant even earlier. And they are pushing gas up north to Ukraine, storing it there because Bulgaria has very modest facility, only 500 million. And there is no place to store more gas to export to Europe when it's needed. And so that's going to reduce the price, but it's also going to bring money. It's going to bring transit fees. It's a very good agreement. I wanted to add something about the sanctions and the shadow fleet. The shadow fleet has been sanctioned by the United States and by Europe in several stages. So most of the tankers of the Russian shadow fleet have been under sanctions. The Russians are buying new, smaller tankers, and they're buying them at exorbitant prices. So they spent a lot on supplying more, collecting more vehicles to export oil. But the price for Russian oil hasn't been good because of the cap on oil, which is $60 now. The Russians have to sell below that cap. Everybody tries to take advantage, of course, of the situation, and China and India are taking advantage of Russia being under sanctions. So the money is not the same. And since about between 40 and 60% of Russian budget depends on energy exports, this is affecting the money that's coming to the Russian budget. And of course, it should theoretically affect the money that's going for the war. But it's not enough. These sanctions, they have to be much, much stricter. The enforcement, much, much stricter, whether it's going to be a combination of lowering the cap or it's going to be a combination with certain tariffs that collected at the Bosphorus. But a lot more needs to be done. One last note. Russia completely lost the European market of energy. The gas market is at 25%. What used to be oil market is at 10%. There will be a law soon that's going to ban Russian gas completely in Europe. The exemptions on oil are expiring this year. So the most lucrative market has been lost. It's important to mention that.
Just to add what the colleagues were saying and what is missing is that there is a supply chain from the well to the market. And 3 years into the war, we still don't have a concerted effort to go from the well. What does it mean from the well? The equipment that they're getting to maintain the gas wells, to maintain the pumping stations, to maintain the valves or whatever, right? Plus financing, transportation, insurance, and shipping. Every stage of the way needs to be targeted methodically. And it's not happening, not on our side and not in Europe. And because we're not coordinating now between Washington and the European capitals, it's making it more difficult, not less difficult, 3 years into the war, to sanctions the oil and gas and finance supply chains of Russia.
Well, that concludes our panel presentations and the Q&A session. I think we're ready to take an evaluation of the energy sector in Ukraine. And so what I would do is ask each of the panelists in alphabetical order again to rate Ukraine, 1 to 5, to rate Ukraine in terms of its progress or lack of progress. You give us a number and you can have a comment on it. And the rating system is 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the best. You could do halves also.
Well, I mean, just starting off, it's, I give Ukraine a 3, but it's because of existential situations. It's at war. It's generating capacity is grossly impaired, any number of other things, but it's a 5 for effort. So
I absolutely agree with this. It's 5 for effort, and it's 5+ in my opinion for effort, because it's unbelievable what the workers of these energy companies are doing given the situation. Otherwise, the energy sector is undergoing some reforms. I wouldn't say that it's not. Decentralization, as I mentioned, is going on. The government is working. The companies that are managing those resources are getting out of different regulations that they don't need anymore. So yeah, I would say 3 for the state of the energy sector, but 5 for it.
Last year, I think I gave Ukraine 5, right? I will probably give overall 4 with 3 for the condition and 5 for the effort. I really think that to the extent Ukraine can, it needs to squeeze the mismanagement and corruption from the system. But it's not the energy assets, it's the management, the governance.
As chairman or a moderator of the panel, my analysis would indicate a 4 for Ukraine's overall energy sector, for the simple reason that they've been able to operate in a very complex environment of war. And that's, you have to give them credit for that. But I give them a 5 for effort very easily because of the resilience they've shown, and something that I think I mentioned at the outset of my comments, and that Margarita, I think, alluded to, is that they've been able to adapt. You know, whether it's getting the European grid or their own ingenuity to patch things together. And that's just amazing that they've been able to do that.
Thank you.
I actually wanted to say, folks,